Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. Welcome all of you that are watching online around the world. We welcome you in here to the Peaceful Solution headquarters so we can all learn together on how to build this positive character, this vision the author had many years ago, and knowing that everything that we're doing is going in the right direction. And when I say things that we're doing, we're making decisions, learning to make decisions that don't bring harm to ourselves, someone else, or the environment. And of course, as we're going to continue to talk about, problems start out small, but solutions can start out small too. And they'll grow, they'll gain steam, they'll get bigger. And we've talked about how to solve problems, things that have taken place in history that have grown that were a benefit to society. And we're also going to talk about some things in tonight's class that, of course, when these problems start out small, how they can grow and they can devastate society. But solutions and problems can both start out small and grow very big. And our society can withstand it whenever we actually show the benefit of it. A lot of people in society will see problems, see situations, and they will detest them. They will say, somebody needs to do something. We need new leadership to get this fixed. But what are we as society doing? You can't always, if your sink's running over and you just need to turn the faucet off, you don't have to wait for the plumber to come to get it done. You can actually turn the faucet off yourself. Sometimes it requires us to put forth a little effort. In fact, there was a senator from Louisiana who I always enjoy listening to just for the fact he is the most upfront, straightforward speaking politician besides Donald Trump I've ever heard in my life. And the other day they were asking him, what does society need to move forward? I can't repeat exactly how he said it, but I can say it well enough you'll understand it. He said they have to get off there and start doing something. And that's exactly right. He said it in a very blunt way, but a lot of times society will really talk down about problems and they'll see these problems. And of course, the solutions usually right there in front of us are the beginning of that solution. But society wants a pill to fix it, so to speak, or they want some kind of magic pixie dust where you just take a wand and boom, and all the problems are gone. Well, that's not how the problems got here. Problems come into our lives through the breaking of the rules of morality, keeping true peace. And that's why we're going to be picking back up here in the Building More Excellence unit, which is the high school unit, the character series. Once again, this is a very popular unit being used around the world, actually. This is a unit that's used in prisons, schools, churches, synagogues, mosques, all around the world. This program transcends religions. It transcends pretty much any kind of division society can create to put in front of you. The peaceful solution can actually make and weave its way through that division to actually bring unity. And that's truly what we see when everyone applies positive character education. When everyone truly has care, concern, and consideration for everyone else. And we don't always think and it's not just American politicians or American government. You'll see Russia and China, they all do the same thing, where we're not just worried about our own personal interest. We're actually worried about the interest of everyone. And that's truly what society is going to have before we bring this peace into our lives. We could say get peace back, but we've had war for 5,000-6,000 years, and there's no peace. That you can look through history and it's recorded war that long, and war has been proven to never bring peace. It's been proven to decimate families, to destroy lives, to maim individuals, to bring disease. There's all kinds of negatives, and if you ever want to do this, you should consider this, and teachers do this with your classroom. And I know that there's many people in the military that will say, no, if you don't have a strong military, then they will crush you. But if you will just take time, look around the world to look at places that don't have a military. Look at the country of Brunei. Look at other countries that are extremely wealthy, and of course they pay the U.S. government to kind of keep people off of them. Saudi Arabia does the same thing. there's a lot of countries that they pay or they solicit. That's why a lot of people want to be in NATO. So they have someone to defend them if they pay a certain percentage of their defense budget to NATO. But once again, it's been proven it doesn't work. War doesn't work. And sit down and write down the pros and cons of war. Really sit down and think about it. And when you write these down, you can think about it on a national level and literally write down what are the pros of war. What do we get out of it? Stealing someone's oil, that's not a pro. Having peace while everyone else has, total mayhem and chaos, that's not a pro unless you're only worried about your own interest. But literally sit down and think about it. And then after you do it from a national level or a global level, sit down and think about your own personal life and having war with your fellow coworker or your family or, someone in your community, and literally sit down and evaluate that. Because there comes a time that, and you've probably experienced it, and you can be turning over to page 183. We're briefly going to cover this, and we're going to get into the next part here. And we left off on this last class in the section entitled One Thing Leads to Another. And when you think about if you've ever been really upset and there's a problem you're dealing with, and let's say you dealt with this problem and you did it in a very negative way. And let's say you feel like you accomplished something. But in the end, there's no positive feelings or emotions or joy that you had that you solved a problem because of the way it was solved. Sometimes we can take a very bumpy route, a route that shouldn't be taken. And sometimes you're never going to see eye to eye with other people. But when we come back down to looking and examining, does this bring harm to myself, someone else, or the environment? Are there rules or applications of the rules that have been given to us that we're not complying with? And those rules, remember, they're put there to keep us safe. And that's really what should determine our decision making, not what we personally feel. If we personally feel something that could bring harm to someone else, that's not a benefit to anyone, not even ourselves. And by saying that, look back here to page 183, and this is the end of procedure 4. We'll read procedure 5 here in a second or procedure 3. We'll get into procedure 4 on the next page. So we're just going to reread over this since this was the last thing we covered. And on the right-hand column here in the box you see, a ripple effect is an incident that causes a series of events. For instance, when a stone is dropped into a pool of water, it causes a series of concentric circles, each one larger than the one before. And when you think about decision making, and remember, for every action there's a reaction. In everything we do, it doesn't matter if you throw a punch, it doesn't matter. I heard someone one time go, well, I stay up late and there's no reaction for it. Well, do you get up early or do you sleep late? Do you get the amount of sleep that's actually required for your body to rejuvenate itself? I know I went through that for years, and I can tell you firsthand, if you don't get enough sleep, you think you're doing great. Until, someone told me a long time ago, when you get 50, the check engine light comes on. And they're right. I got 50 and the check engine light came on, and it's all of these things that you think, not going to bother me. I can do 4 hours of sleep, been doing it for 20 years. Well, at 25 years or 30 years, it's like your body's, tell you, no, this is enough. Can't do it anymore. And that's just an example of taking care of ourselves, but think about neglect in society. And when I say neglect in society, I know there's a lot of people here about my age, some a little older, some a little younger. Think about what society was like when you were in school. And then think of what is in the headlines right now. If you hear things about school, you'll hear a lot about transgender athletes, which wasn't heard of when I was in school. You'll hear a lot about even the Department of Education being done away with because the United States has the lowest quality of education when it's compared to other major countries. You think about, well, how did we get this way? Here we're supposed to be the most wealthiest, the most prosperous country on the face of the earth, and how did our education level drop so low? And we tend to think, well, that's just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, no, morality has plummeted also. Go back and watch, if you're a teacher, and this is kind of a tricky area because in today's woke agenda, if you want to wake up and see what you're doing that's causing harm. That's the woke that people need to be doing. That's what we all have to do. But look at the way videos were created in the 1950s, so to speak, that were presented in schools. And the level and the encouragement and the attention that was put on morality. And then compare one today. It's vastly different. It's just extremely different to where in today's society, morality, the whole definition has been redefined. The definition of morality today is, in public view, I just accept what everyone else is doing. Well, that means I have to accept that things that are going to bring harm to myself, someone else, or the environment. And the Peaceful Solution teaches about acceptance, and it says don't accept that. You have to accept the right that everyone has the right to choose, and everyone has the right to make their own decisions. But if someone is doing something that brings harm to themselves, someone else, or the environment, you don't have to accept that fact that they're doing that. You have to determine to separate yourself from them or join with them. And sadly, sometimes people have to see the negative side effects of their choices come to fruition before they actually see how bad it really was. But at the very top of the page here, it says how we interact with each other and the choices we make have the potential to ripple outward with after effects far greater than the original incident. And these things can be positive or negative. We read about that in the 5th chapter of the character unit. And what we're doing here tonight at the Peaceful Solution headquarters. It's hard to believe that we always have more people watching online than we have in the auditorium. And we have a lot of people that are training to be certified teachers here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters. But there's many, many people that watch online. There's people that watch online right now that have someone translating it to them in different languages in Africa and also in South America. And we have teachers that are sitting in Mexico right now that will be working on translating these classes. And that's how important it is that we get this message out. And this ripple effect that we see that now it really encompasses the world. When you think about this being spoken in Swahili and tribal languages in Nigeria, whether it be Igbo and so forth, it's tremendous to see what's taking place. And the interesting thing is, you had an author that was inspired by his father from some things that were said. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Never get even or fight back. And then here come a group of teachers in to help create a curricula that he overseen and, of course, put in everything the way he's seen it need to be done. He had the vision. And then you have people from all around the world that they take hold of it, and now they're doing their part running with it. And the amazing thing is, it's not that we're doing anything special. These people are literally grabbing it and running with it. They see the need for it. All we've done is we learned something, and then we repeated what we learned. And it's spreading. And it's like a ripple effect. And it's a very small ripple compared to the misery we see in society today. But the more ripples, the more pressure, the more that goes into that pond, the greater they become. And it's really inspiring when you can see it. Some people don't believe it until they see it, which has always humored me. I've always said this, there's always a plane seat beside them if anybody wants to go. Because it's really inspiring. I'm always inspired when you meet people that they just want a change in life. Because this one thing leads to another, they're suffering from this one thing leading to another. We don't really have to do that right now in the United States. We're really benefiting from the suffering of the world, because for us to get what we want, the world pretty much has to do without, so we can live the life we want, because we kind of hoard the wealth. And I'm not speaking against the United States. I love the United States, best country on the face of the earth. But just think about what life would be like if everyone had a level playing field. Why does one country's money have to be worth $4,400 to $1? Why does a loaf of bread in one country have to cost $4 million or $4 million? Why does it have to be that way? It really doesn't. But for a group of people to want life easy, really, really easy, and compensating on a global scale, somebody else has got to have life really, really hard. And you'll see that on a global scale, especially a lot of you who are going to be teaching here soon and communicating with these people. You learn a lot when you're teaching people in other countries, because what seemed like a simple fix for you and I is very difficult. And I'll explain it this way. Whenever COVID took place, and we've seen how one thing led to another, and I'm not here to, Wuhan labs or any of that stuff. Obviously, there was a disease, a virus that spread all around the world very quickly. And then think about how the United States, for a short time, paper towels disappeared off the shelf. You couldn't get a can of Lysol. If you didn't have toilet paper, you couldn't find it in the stores. You go into the stores and the shelves were empty. And the United States was like in shock. That's normal life for most people. There were literally countries sending me messages saying, now you know what it's like where we live. You guys think that's hard? That's every day here. But now I have people sending me pictures of their shelves full of eggs while we have none in the United States. That's they say what comes around goes around. But we really, with this character education we're talking about, and of course what we're saying with the benefits we have in the United States of living here, this is something everyone should have, no matter where you're from. No matter what your background has been, no matter what kind of bad decisions you've made, we all have this opportunity to fix ourselves. And that's what we have to realize, that one thing leads to another. And here in the second paragraph, it says, conversely, when someone makes a choice to be respectful and considerate to others and their belongings, the result is a positive ripple effect. So positive things can ripple out and negative things can ripple out. But one thing always to keep in mind, for every action, there's a reaction. And, this one time the author of The Peaceful Solution, who was, I think I would call him the ultimate diplomat, he was able to communicate with people in a way that always amazed me. And sometimes you can have very wise people give you advice, and you tend to forget it until you needed it. And he would always say that when you say a hard word, or when you say something very harsh, it's like someone throwing a baseball or shooting a bullet at you, but it's going to ricochet. It's going to come back. So whatever you throw at somebody, expect it to come back twice as hard. And if it doesn't come back twice as hard, just know that person was better than you. And that's a very important thing to remember. It would be nice to always have that in the forefront of the mind, which is where we need it. But once again, sometimes when we prove our points, or we feel we needed to prove our points, and then we're done with it, we realize we've disrespected a lot of people. We didn't give them the rights that's owed to them and their decision making. We just want our way. And our way is not always the best way. Sometimes it's really beneficial to see the input of many people. This world, it consists of more than just you or I. And it takes all of us to enjoy life. And what I enjoy, you might not enjoy. We all have things that we like. And of course, as long as we're not bringing harm to anyone or ourselves or the environment, that's the very basic concepts of what we need to be doing. Well, looking over to Procedure 4 here on Lesson Plan 5, page F, we're going to talk about some examples, sadly, of irresponsibility. And it's not to, we don't talk about the bad choices in the Peaceful Solution to magnify them. But if you're running through the dark, you want someone to tell you there's a chair in your way. Because if someone doesn't tell you the chair's in your way, by the time you realize it, it's too late. You're already suffering the consequences of it. Or if you go walking halfway, I don't care what it is. I don't know about you, but if I leave something in my floor, I can find it with my big toe every morning. I have no idea why. And for some reason, I had very little sense one morning, and I left dumbbells laying in my floor one night and woke up the next morning and didn't know you could kick a 25-pound dumbbell with your toe, but you can, and it hurts really, really bad. So I call it a dumbbell. I think I refer to myself more than the weight itself. But here in Procedure 4, it says, explain to students that 2 examples of irresponsible choices that can ripple outward affecting others are drinking and driving and engaging in premarital sex. And once again, this is where you're going to find, because we're going to use a word, we'll probably get to it tonight. We're going to use a certain word in this. It's in a poem. And people will kind of draw back and go, whoa, I thought this wasn't religion. It's not religion. The Peaceful Solution teaches morality. That's what the Peaceful Solution does. Now, there's words that people might define them as religious, but they're not religious. They're nouns and adjectives and pronouns, and they're words you use to describe things. So, just because someone defines a word as religious doesn't necessarily make it religious. It's just a word that's used to define something or to get your information across to another person. And of course, when you see this premarital sex, it's talking about having a certain type of relationship without a commitment, which has scientifically been proven to cause disease. In fact, 2 million new STDs every year in the United States. And of course, they keep spreading. And on a global scale, it's astronomical. So scientific studies have proven that these type of relationships without commitments bring a lot of disease. And that's just a scientific fact. But we'll get into it more, and you'll see what we're talking about here shortly. Notice it says, have class turn to the section entitled More Than Just a Personal Choice, found on page 184, and allow students to listen to the poem, The Teacher's Manual Audio Lesson. And if you get this book in PDF, the file is actually embedded in the book. You'll see a little speaker, and it says click to play. And you just click it if you have the PDF version of the book, and it will play. The audio is right there in the book itself. If you don't have it, then you just have to request. There's not cassettes anymore. We send MP3s. You don't really even get a CD. We'll send you an MP3. That way you'll have it. And you can read them yourself, but I tell you, the people that did these did very well in putting the emotion behind it, especially this poem we're talking about here, because it's really powerful. But continuing on here, it says they can follow along on page 185, have students to complete the accompany exercise, understanding the main point, on page 186, or assign for homework. Follow up on home assignments by discussing their answers as a class. Emphasize that when we maintain a moral character, we think not only of our own needs and wants, but of others as well. So we're not really considering, what's in my interest. What's in it for me, so to speak. I hear that a lot from some people. Well, if I got to do this, what's in it for me? What am I getting out of this? Well, I get, it used to be just the sense of knowing you made the right choice was enough, but I guess that's not enough anymore either. But here on page 184, more than just a personal choice. Notice here it says we currently live in a society where everyone does not value the development of positive character. And once again, there's a lot said in that right there. Notice the development. This is not something that, like a can of paint, where if something's purple and you want to paint it blue, you just get it out and there you go. It doesn't work that fast. It's almost like planting a tree. You plant that tree and you watch it slowly grow. It's like if you want to eat an apple off an apple tree and you decide to plant one. It will take you a long time before you actually get to eat the apples off that apple tree. It's the same thing with developing positive character. Before we get to see the full benefits of what we're doing, it's going to take a little bit of time, and it's going to grow. The ripple effect's going to expand it, but we will see the benefits if we put in the work. And, one thing that's really important is, depending on what age you're at, you can put in work to try to make society better, and you might not even see it improve in your lifetime. It could be the generations that come after you that you'll see it improve. You always hear People say, well, the national debt, our great-grandchildren, we're making bills for them. I really don't worry about the national debt as much as I worry about the morality. Debt can be with some curtailing. You see it going on right now, cutting things and all of that. But, you can get yourself in debt. 34 trillion is pretty deep. But if you don't have morality, you can forget about getting out of debt. The war is going to keep coming. And there's no peace because there's arguing, there's griping, there's only concern for yourself and not for everyone. But continuing on here, it says, every day people make decisions that on the surface appear to be personal. But if you look beneath the surface, these decisions can affect many others. Now think about that, on how the decisions you make every day. And think about decisions you might make that affect a large group of people, not just yourself. And it could be something very simple, kind of like, let's say you're someone that's supposed to open the door to a workplace, to a business, to a wood shop, whatever. And let's say, well, I know I'm supposed to be there at 8, but I'll be there by 8:30. No one's going to notice, except the 10 people standing outside the door because no one unlocked the door. Think about how that affects them. Or as we talked about, a school bus driver being punctual. Well, what if the school bus driver, he's supposed to be there at 6 a.m., but, well, he wanted to watch the Super Bowl, stayed up all night, so 7 a.m. will be that today. Well, think about how it throws everything off from that point on. Or even worse, think about if I'm supposed to pick him up at 6, but I think I'm going to come early today. I'll just drive by at 5. Well, no one's going to be there. And that's just kind of some drastic examples, but what kind of choices do we make that affect others? What if we're given instructions or someone has taught us something very positive and we decide, it's really not that important? Don't worry about it. The scary part about when we do that as a society, we don't see the effects of it all of a sudden. It takes time to see, oh boy, that was important, wasn't it? It was important to put lock washers on those bolts before we tighten them down. It was important to put salt in this. It was important to make sure that we did this, this, and this. Wow. But you know what? You don't get to go back and undo all of the negative things that took place because, it seemed important to that time, but now it's not that important. You can blow it off. And the scary part about it is, if someone gives us an instruction in morality, odds are that has been tried and tested for a while before it was set into to be a rule. And it was proven to be positive. It was proven to have a positive effect on others. Otherwise, why make it a rule? There's no reason to make it a rule. The whole reason we have rules are to keep us safe. Rules aren't meant to be aggressive. They're not meant to put other people down. Rules are basically created to keep us safe. Rules of morality. But continuing on here, it says, take, for example, the choice to drink and drive. Once again, I encourage everyone to go back. It was 2 classes ago. Listen to David's class he gave when he spoke about, he went through this as a child. And I think it's always very powerful to hear the testimony of someone that's lived it. And he spoke about how his father being killed by a drunk driver when he was I think he said 9 years old. And he's talked about how it still affected him to this day. And he's in like 67, I think now. So it's almost 60 years ago. And you think about how people make really bad choices that affect people they've never met. And and the person that ran over his father most likely is already deceased. But what he did still affecting a lot of people. Think about the mother, the brothers, the sisters, everybody that was affected by that. And you never really see the full magnitude of how you affect other people, as we'll read in this poem here shortly. But continuing on, it says, abuse of alcohol has become a serious problem that often has disastrous results. Drinking has been equated with having fun, relaxation, and means to conform and fit in. People abuse alcohol by using it to escape from reality or to forget about their problems rather than solve them. When drinking is combined with driving, the result can be deadly. Drinking impairs the ability to think and function at optimal levels, and this occurs even before the point of intoxication. Now, something that's we wouldn't have in here that I'm sure you'll add a note to the side. If we were writing this book today, it would be in here because it's a scientific fact that when you're driving down the road doing this, it's just as equal to drinking and driving. They say that people who text and drive actually have less motor skills in what they're doing than people who are intoxicated, because they take all of their attention. And when you think about how much time does it take to pull your attention off of what you're doing when you're driving a vehicle in the state of Texas, 70 mile an hour. How long does it take just to swerve over into the other lane and to do something very negatively? But then when you think about drinking and driving, I want you to think about this. City of Abilene, I think the census just for the city, I think the last time they did it was like 140,000. And of course, Abilene has a lot of other towns that help make up Abilene, which gets up close to 500,000 people. But the city of Abilene itself was like 140,000. Well, imagine if you were going to create 140,000 people in a town. How long would it take you, or a city? How long would it take you to do that? And the reason I want to get that in your mind, because between 2012 and 2022, 122,000 people were recorded as being killed in alcohol-related incidents in the United States. 122,000 people in 10 years. So imagine if you had a disease that wiped out 90% of the city of Abilene in 10 years. Think about the red lights, the cautions, everything that would be going up. This is devastating. But as society, we've kind of accepted that it's just something people do. And they've had so many ideas on how to keep people from drinking and driving. I've had students that before they get in the car and crank it, they have to blow into this device that will then let the electricity flow through the switch itself. When they go to turn it, if they blow too much, it won't turn on. And I always thought about all you do is just have someone else blow through it. This is not rocket science here. It doesn't really check your DNA to see if you're the one that blew through it, and people were doing that. And a lot of states have decided, that doesn't work, because they just blow through this for me. Okay, great. Now I can get in the car and drive home. And then when I was in school, you had the designated driver. Everyone was supposed to have a designated driver. And it was like, think about this. Everybody's going to go out and get drunk, so you need to be the only one that don't get drunk. It seems like it would be better to say, nobody go get drunk, everybody drink responsible. If you're going to drink within a certain limit. Don't get intoxicated. And you kind of wonder why society has endorsed, if you're going to get plastered, just make sure one person doesn't get drunk with you, and they can drive you home. And when you think about, we're actually teaching people it's okay to get totally drunk, where you can't even drive home. Just have you need one responsible human being that you're going with. Everybody else can be irresponsible. But there's a lot of other things that take place besides driving home when you're intoxicated that we'll get into. But once again here, it says driving impairs the ability to think and function at optimal levels, and this occurs even before the point of intoxication. You don't have to be drunk to be unable to function. Often the person might not realize that he is not in full control of himself. They might think that they are doing great. If asked, they are able to drive. If asked if they are able to drive, they would say, yeah, sure, no problem. Too often, the choice to drink and drive becomes a problem for the driver and for anyone else who is sharing the road with him. And you really have to think about how freely everyone's able to make that choice. And this is why it's so important to get morality taught into society. If you or I or anyone else, just use ourselves as an example, we own a car. If you don't own a car, just imagine you do. And you go out and you drink. Let's just say you go home and drink. No one else around you. And you had your 12-pack and I'm still thirsty. I need to go get more. I'm just fine. There's no one there to tell you don't do it. There's no one to tell you that, you're putting somebody's life in danger. You're bringing harm to yourself, someone else, and the environment around you. and then you go do it and you make it back and you think, made it back okay, no problem. And you do it 10 times, 12 times. But one of those times, eventually, someone gets hurt or you kill yourself. That's why it's so important that we have to individualize this responsibility and this decision-making and morality for ourselves. Because, it's like playing Russian roulette. Eventually, you get to the chamber that's going to bring harm. And that's the same thing with this decision-making that takes lives in many forms. Continuing on here, it says, no one who drinks and drives expects to cause an accident, possibly hurting themselves or others. Yet too often this is exactly what occurs. The effects of that choice goes beyond that one incident, rippling outward, affecting the lives of the driver, the victim, their families, and community. Once again, I think of David because I've known him for a long time. And I grew up with someone that got killed in a drunk driving accident that I went to school with. And I've seen how it affected their family. But sadly, they were the drunk driver, the person I went to school with. They were the one that made the bad choice. And it destroyed that family. He had a twin brother, identical twin brother. And, just that seeing a person that looked like the person that went to sleep or died, was horrible on the mother that was still left alive. And it was really devastating. It was mind-blowing to see how fast life could change for a family. And it was drastic, extremely drastic. But continuing on here, it says both the driver and the victim could suffer death or injuries that could permanently change their lives. And once again, imagine 122,000 people killed in 10 years. That's the size of a city that's just 10 miles away. That's an enormous amount of people. We tend to hear these numbers, and sometimes we don't see millions or billions. We think it's not that much. But when you go into a city and think, man, in 10 years, this whole city would be dead from this one statistic, then you start seeing how horrible it is. And then think about, of those people, how many families are affected? How many people are affected? How many, mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers and all of these people are lost, or children that are lost because of this. And it's really hard to process this sometimes, because until it affects us personally, we don't really see the magnitude of the results of it. But here is a poem, and this is a really decent poem. One of the most powerful poems that the Peaceful Solution has. It was put together very well. And once again, don't know who the author was. I remember this it being discussed that someone turned it in to be used, and the magnitude of it. And I would encourage everyone to get the MP3 version of it. It's done very well. But here it says, listen to the following poem about how someone's personal choices resulted in the death of an innocent person. Then answer the questions that follow. So we'll read this poem, and then, of course, on page 186, we'll have some questions. But continuing on here, it says, death of an innocent. I went to the party, Mom, and I remembered what you said. You told me not to drink alcohol, so I drank soda instead. I felt really great inside, the way you said I would. I didn't drink and drive, Mom, though the others said I should. As soon as I entered my car, I knew I'd be okay, but little did I know the price I have to pay. I started driving away, but as I pulled into the road, the other car didn't see me and hit me like a load. As I lay there on the pavement, I heard the policeman say, the other guy was drinking, now I'm the one to pay. Just wanted to tell you, Mom, I was obedient. I didn't drink. It was the others, Mom. The others didn't think. The guy who hit me is walking, Mom. I don't think it's fair. I'm laying here dying. All he does is stare. My breath is getting shorter, Mom. I'm becoming very scared. I love you, Mom. When I needed you, you were always there. I have one last question, Mom. Before I say bye, I didn't drink and drive, so why am I the one to die? When you think about that, if you've experienced that in your life with someone, you see the power behind it. It's truly a huge thing. And think about an innocent person that suffers, that loses their life because someone else wanted to have fun. Someone else wanted to do something for that one night. They just had to enjoy it. And it doesn't seem so important when someone else is dying. But sadly, I've seen situations where when someone else died, it wasn't a regret or feeling bad about what they did. The only thing they regretted was, oh no, what's going to occur to me? I'm probably going to go to jail now. And the whole concept is still, what about me? What's going to occur to me? Well, the worst thing you can do is ever take a life of another. And when you think about in this situation, this is something that's preventable, very much preventable. There's many things we can do in our life and feel bad about. There's a lot of things that we see when we teach in the prisons. I have, and I know William and David and Catan and Jeffrey, and some of you have talked to people in prisons, and I have a lot of, I call them close friends in prison, that took the life of someone else. And the regret that they have is just enormous. And I've never met one person yet who says, well, I was taught everything I needed to know. I just did it. Most of these people made these decisions that I know when they were extremely young. I mean, I know people my age that I talk to pretty much on a monthly basis. They went to prison when they were 17 years old. And they've been in there my whole life because they're the same age I am. And they're still in there to this day. And you think about the decision they made, and this is multiple people, not just one person. You're talking about only 4 or 5 minutes. And it cost them their whole life of what they could have had, how they could have grown up. And you think about what they're put into. I spoke to one gentleman, and he said, I've had friends that got out. And I have a friend that got out, and he got out, was out of prison for like 1.5 years and got killed in a car wreck. And he never did figure out how to fit into society because he went into prison extremely young. No one really helped him while he was in prison as far as develop. He finally took the Peaceful Solution Character Education program, and that helped him tremendously. But then once a person gets out, you're kind of told this is where you can live, and you can't go here, you can't go here, you can't go here. And he wasn't even allowed to go back into the community he grew up in because that's where he committed the crime. And here, a person, imagine being set inside of a prison facility for 30 years. And then you're told, okay, go to society. You're free. You don't know the people that hate you, which, this person, myself and William, were really close friends with him. This man received so many threats, so much hate, because he made a really bad choice when he was young. But the people that hated that man and what they put in the papers and the things they said about him was just horrific. There was no aspects of, this person made a really bad choice, and he says he did, and he's done everything he could to fix what he could, but he can't bring back what he took. And then you're thrown out into a society where, figure it out. When you went into prison, there was no internet. There was no this, there was no that, there was no this. And then you come out and the whole world's totally changed. And you can't really go to where you've been educated because you're told you can't go. It's like someone taking you. Imagine if someone was to take you, and drop you off in North Korea and say, here you go, figure it out. Don't know the language, have no idea what rules have changed. I'm supposed to be living by these rules. I just went to prison. No one told me what rules changed since I've been in prison for 30 years. And think about how society, this lack of education, but you're expected to adhere to these rules that you know nothing about, by the way. That's why the Peaceful Solution is such a benefit. The rules are simplistic, extremely simplistic. The application of the rules sometimes are blurred by our own ideology. And that's where confusion sets in. But understanding the main point here, it says from the poem, and this is something you want to have a very engaging discussion with your class. Something that, and be mindful when you do these things, because we have had experiences with schools we went to and children committed suicide at that school. Literally, like just before the year before we got there, 6 months before we got there. When you're talking to students in a school, be mindful that there might be a student that is suffering from something like this. Someone has lost a family member to drunk driving, or someone has been murdered, or someone has went through this. So always be mindful and try to watch your class, because I can tell you, if you're dealing with someone that's been through it, you'll see it on their face. You can't hold back that kind of emotion. So always be mindful, and never hesitate to ask the guidance counselors. That's really your best friend when you go into a school to teach. Ask them, is there anything we need to be aware of before we teach this particular subject? Guidance counselors are usually aware of the personal issues that are going on in the class that you've been assigned to do, because guidance counselors are usually the ones that reach out to the Peaceful Solution asking for the program to come into the school. So never hesitate to try to get your mind aware of who you're dealing with, because there's a lot of bad things in society today, and we've come across a lot of it. But here it says, from the poem, can you see what some of the positive character traits of the victim were? And of course, really think about it. You know, she was obedient to her mother. She made great choices. She did not conform to negative peer pressure. You know, she did a lot of right things. She really took the information she was given to make a great choice. And then 2 here, it says, what negative character traits did the other driver demonstrate by his choice to drink and drive? Well, of course, you'll see that his choices showed that he did not practice self-control. He was also selfish, irresponsible, inconsiderate, and disrespectful. You know, and remember, he showed disrespect by not even respecting himself, by getting intoxicated, by getting, your mind blurred from alcohol is not even showing self-respect. What type of relationship, here number 3, what type of relationship do you think the victim had with her mother? And how do you think the mother will be affected by her daughter's death? You know, and I have people or friends that have lost children that have died, some of them pretty horrific. And, you know, this is something that parents don't recover from. You know, to lose a child is a horrific thing. And it's something that, and no parent ever wants to experience that ever in their life. And you can't even begin to understand a mother. You know, I'm speaking from a father's standpoint, especially a mother and a daughter. You know, there's a bonding that takes place. And a lot of times mothers and daughters can be best friends. And you see how someone is just snatched out of someone else's life like that. And the worst part about it is, you know, the mother's probably going, I shouldn't have just told her not to drink. I should have told her don't even go there. If there's negative things taking place in that environment, don't even go. Because think about this for yourself, and this is why it's so important. You know, when I go to certain countries, it's really standard to, when people have meetings, and I don't know why, I can't even explain this, they'll give you an address, and you're like, I've learned now. It took me the first time, I didn't know, because I went to a place, and I'm looking up, and I'm like, there's no way this is where I'm supposed to meet these people. It was a nightclub. And I sent back, listen, I've never been to a bar, never been to a nightclub, and today will not be the first time. Find a different place to meet. Oh, this is the way we do it here. Well, that's great. That's not the way I do it. So find a different place to meet. But some people, that's the environment they feel comfortable in because they grew up in those things. And the reason I bring that up, sometimes you have to look. If there's negative things going on in that environment, you can take all the positivity of yourself you want to in that environment. You're still surrounded by negativity that's going to affect you. Kind of like this young lady. Just imagine if she'd have stayed at home that night. Could have been a totally different story. You know, but if you ever set your mind, I'm going to be as positive as I can be. And I'm going to go into this really, really negative place, and everybody's going to be doing really bad things, but I'm going to stay positive. You know, always think, why are you even there then? What benefit are you bringing to this environment? You know, it's very important that we always consider what purpose we're serving. And if we can't see that we're doing anything to bring a positive result into the environment, that's pretty much information letting us know we don't even belong in that environment. We should stay away from it. But here on question number, let's see, 3, the relationship, what do you think they had with the mother and the daughter? There was a mutual love, respect, and concern between mother and daughter. Her mother would experience feelings of shock, disbelief, grief, which could have a negative impact on her for the rest of her life. And no doubt the mother would have been probably thinking, I should have told her not to go. You know, people always tend to blame themselves when something bad occurs to someone else, especially if they gave the advice. Here in number 4, it says, what after effects could this incident have on the driver and his family? Well, the driver and his family will have to live with the knowledge that he is responsible for the death of another human being, which is absolutely horrific. They will have to live with feelings of guilt, remorse, shame, and embarrassment. You know, and this is the sad part about society. Look at your local news for the last week here in Abilene, Texas. Have you ever noticed it's rare for them to post news articles about when someone does a great thing, they make the right choice? You hardly ever see that. And then you'll see some people make a bad choice and they give you their name, they tell you where they live, and that's pretty much it. But then there's some people that make a bad choice and automatically they label this group or that group of people. And it's suggested that these people are the cause of this. That's like saying, and I use this as an example, I don't state this as a fact, I use this as an example. That's like saying when September 11th occurred, that every time you seen somebody that was Muslim, they were going to do a terrorist attack. Or that's like trying to blame everyone in the Middle East for what occurred on September 11th. You know, you only think that way when you're here in the United States. When you travel to other countries, and we experienced this in Argentina, when we had a logo at one time that was designed by someone that used to volunteer for the Peaceful Solution, they did a new logo of the whole world. And we had a soldier just to represent what's going on around the world, and it was stuck in a certain location just randomly. I never noticed it was stuck on Argentina until I was in Argentina. And they very quickly pointed out, why do you have your soldiers stationed here? You need to station that in the United States. You guys are the ones bringing all the war. We don't bring war. And they were offended by it. You know what? We got rid of that. We don't use that logo anymore, by the way. But we learned a lot. You know, that you truly try to respect, and the person had a valid point. And, of course, you'll find a lot when you're in the United States and you're trying to teach character education, the first thing people will say to you, why aren't you teaching this in the United States? They need it bad. I don't disagree with that. You know, and we do teach it in the United States, by the way. This is the headquarters. This is where you come to get certified. And there's classes going around all around the world and also in the United States. Many people watching right now in the United States. So it is taught, but sadly, in today's climate and the woke movement and everything else that takes place, people have their own interest in mind, and they're not worried about the interest of everyone else. Morality causes you to have concern for everyone else. Self-interest causes you not to care about anyone else. Just get what you want out of life. And sadly, that's a battle that's taking place, not just in the United States, but where we're living, we can see it firsthand. But getting back here and thinking about this relationship between this mother and this mother and the daughter, and then this man who affected this life and then his family, it says the poem represents a hypothetical situation, but the reality is over 5,000 teens die needlessly in auto collisions every year in the United States alone. You know, the number one cause of death for teenagers is accidental. That's the number one cause of death. And then you get into the 3 stages of the leading causes of death for teenagers. And, you know, it's horrific when you get into when 2 of the top 3 leading causes of death for teenagers is accidental and suicide. You tend to question yourself about what's going on in society. But here it says, teenagers are more likely than older drivers to ride with an intoxicated driver and drive using alcohol or drugs. In 2000, 30% of drivers ages 15 to 20 who died in a motor vehicle crash had been drinking alcohol. And imagine that, 15 years old, that's when you get your permit. That's when you can drive, but it has to be with a licensed driver. So there's supposed to be someone responsible for teaching you how to drive, not showing you how to drink and drive. Drunk driving has become problematic and still is problematic and has adversely affected many lives. Many have seen the need to interfere by educating people about the effects of drunk driving and have formed support groups in order to address this issue. These groups try to make a difference, but the real difference will come when people begin to consider their choices and actions and begin to value their lives and the lives of others. And here's a few cold facts. Cold hard facts, actually. 1/3 of high school students binge drink one or more times a month. Binge drink one or more times a month. And it's considered humorous. When you see these fraternity parties, they have the funnel and they got the hose that's about that big around and pouring beer down it as fast as they can pour down it or whatever they want to, and someone's got the funnel in their mouth and they're drinking it as fast as they can. And then the first thing they do is they stand them up and they try to get them to do a certain task. It's kind of like, I think I'm going to take a bath. Let me throw the electrical cord in it before I get in. You've already made the situation really bad. There's nothing great that can come of this. And the people that are filling that funnel full of alcohol, they have no respect for the person they're doing that to. In fact, they're showing pure hatred to that person. And a lot of people, they have hazing and so forth, and a lot of people die from that. It's been in the news every year. You see it in the news. And it's a really sad fact. Once again, this is morality has been pushed out because people want to have fun. And then you see here, teens who drink are 5 times more likely to drop out of high school than those who do not. Alcohol lowers inhibition, putting teens at risk for STDs, pregnancies, and rape. 500,000 young people have had sex while under the influence of alcohol. Alcohol diminishes the ability to make responsible decisions at a time when responsible decisions are most needed. And I've heard people say, well, give me an example of how that takes place. As a teacher, just Google it. Don't have your children do it, just Google it. It's not hard to find where a young lady will go to a party, she gets pregnant, she was drunk, everybody else was drunk, and she has to have DNA tests done because she was with so many guys that night, it's impossible for her to know who the father is. That is not a rare occurrence. So when people say, well, I don't see how alcohol can affect that, you're just not knowledgeable to what's going on in society if you say that, or you're trying to justify your own actions. There's nothing positives that come from negatives. And it's extremely available, this information, to get it, to see it. And it's scared because you might laugh out, you can laugh about it when you were a person in college or high school and you were doing it, but don't worry, sooner or later that'll be your daughter and you won't think it's funny then, especially when she's a single mother. And keep this in mind. We look at a lot of other countries and we justify ourselves, and I've been to many countries that I'm astounded by how many single mothers there are. It's mind-blowing. But if you do a research, and now granted some of these countries do not report because it's an embarrassment. They don't report their statistics. But if you Google which country has the most single-parent family homes, it's the United States. And, of course, well, we're running out of time right here. William will get into this, and then you'll see the word that we use here to define something as he will teach next week. But think about all of the decisions we make, how we're affecting others. Think about things that we wouldn't do now that we did when we were younger. And, well, how can we get other people to see that they shouldn't do it? Because there were people telling us not to do things too, and we still did it. So how do we get this information across to them so they understand it? Can't be, well, once they get killed, then they'll learn. Well, that don't work, because then there's no way to make a choice after that. You know, it all has to do with if you made a choice in your life that was negative, someone tried to show you it was fun, someone influenced you and you made a choice. Obviously, we have to take the influences that come into our lives very seriously, and that way our choices can be better with our decision making. You know, but you could try to read ahead here a little bit because it's going to get into teenage pregnancies, and it's going to talk about, you know, a lot of information about what's going on in society. So we're going to stop right here on page 188. And of course, it's finishing procedure 4 and then getting into procedure 5 is a little tricky. William will explain that, the way the pages fall. But if you can pre-read over a little bit of it and do some research, and then when you come into class, you'll find out this is a very important topic because a lot of people die, and this is not stressed enough. A lot of people die from premarital sex. And people can say, oh, I can't see that. Well, come next class, we've already taught it many times, you will see that it is just as deadly, if not more, than heart disease, cancer, and sometimes it's the source of all of those diseases. So once again, thank you for joining us. Our next class will be this coming Sunday, March the 2nd at 5:30, and we look forward to seeing you again.